morning, and welcome to FDA's Tobacco Product Application Review public meeting. I am Mitch Zeller, Director of FDA Center for Tobacco Products, and I want to thank you all for attending this meeting and also for your understanding as we changed the location of the meeting from Silver Spring to here in Rockville. And for those of you who are familiar with this hotel, and when we all used to work in the Park Lawn building 800 years ago, this was the only hotel where we could hold meetings. So it's sort of like for us old timers, Old Home Day, even though it's now a Hilton and it's undergone a complete facelift. In July of last year, as you all know, FDA Commissioner Gottlieb unveiled the agency's comprehensive plan for tobacco and nicotine regulation. Understandably, then, much of the discussion and the media coverage focused on certain elements of the plan, such as the potential for a nicotine product standard. However, the announcement also had several key efforts in the areas of tobacco product application and review. For example, the Commissioner promised that CTP would examine its existing approach to what are called the provisional substantial equivalence reports that were still remaining in the review queue. And less than 10 months later, we announced a new approach to these products that allows for increased efficiency, better use of resources, and greater transparency, while still making sure those products with the greatest potential to raise different questions of public health will still undergo the full multidisciplinary scientific review. This past summer, we implemented additional efforts to improve transparency for applicants. Previously, applicants needed to file a Freedom of Information request to obtain certain review documents. We heard feedback that receiving this information more rapidly is critical to the decision-making process on whether to seek further supervisory review when a company receives an adverse decision. And so we made a change. And as of August, copies of these documents are now available to companies following receipt of a final decision action. We also continue to hear about the importance of transparency from other stakeholders, and we will continue to strive to make our decisions and our processes as transparent as possible. These types of improvements and our willingness to reassess existing policies remains a key aspect of our plan. It's why we're having this meeting, where we will have a two-way dialogue that can lead to a better understanding of the tobacco product application process and improvements that would benefit the public health. The comprehensive plan we announced last year is based on the vision of a world where cigarettes would no longer create or sustain addiction, and where adults who still seek nicotine can get it from alternative and less harmful sources. But to achieve that vision, any potentially less harmful nicotine-delivering products still need to be properly reviewed and authorized through the pre-market review process. In order to best evaluate these products, we're committed to continuing to develop guidance and regulations that further spell out the rules of the road, if you will, for the companies who are submitting these applications. I'm sure that many of you have questions about the current status of the compliance policy for deemed products on the market as of August 8th, 2016, and the deadlines for submission of those applications. I can't say anything publicly beyond what the Commissioner has already said, other than to say that we are re-examining that policy, and as the Commissioner has stated, all options are on the table. I can assure you that we are working expeditiously to make those decisions and to announce them as quickly as possible. Beyond that policy, we're already working on additional improvements that we also hope to announce soon, but we also want to hear from all of you. The next 2 days provide us with an opportunity to engage in a dialogue, and I'm hopeful that the presentations from our staff will answer some of your questions and clarify some points of confusion. All of us in CTP, from Matt Holman and his team in the Office of Science, to me and my colleagues in the Office of the Center Director, look forward to hearing and learning about practical feedback and suggestions that we can use to make positive changes to our processes. As we delve into the various review processes over the next 2 days, I hope everyone can keep this meeting's common goal in mind, to leverage the collective knowledge in this room to inform and improve the process for pre-market review of tobacco products. Before closing, I do need to somewhat abruptly shift gears and share some very sad news that impacts part of CTP's participation in our meeting today and tomorrow, and apologies in advance for having to make this announcement publicly. Over the weekend, a dear CTP colleague, David Keith, passed away unexpectedly following a very brief illness. David was the director of the Division of Enforcement and Manufacturing in OCE, our Office of Compliance and Enforcement, and was actually supposed to be one of the speakers here tomorrow. David was a wonderful leader in OCE. His passing is a shock and a great loss for CTP and to public health. As you can imagine, it's taking a very hard toll personally and professionally on his OCE colleagues, many of whom will be joining me at his funeral tomorrow. So all of the OCE speakers on the agenda beyond David will not be able to participate this afternoon or tomorrow. I'm very sorry to have to share this tragic news in such a public way, especially for many of you in the audience who knew David and are learning of his passing for the first time. My apologies. So, to transition back to the purpose of our gathering here today and tomorrow, FDA remains committed to the principles of our comprehensive plan, including efforts to improve efficiency and transparency when it comes to the review process. And on behalf of the Commissioner and everyone at CTP, I want to thank you all for being here today and participating in this effort with us. And with that, I will turn things over to Jeff Walker for some of his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning to all of you. I didn't know David personally, but I had spoken with him on the phone several times, and I'm sorry for CTP's loss. Well, it's my sincere pleasure to be here with all of you today and with those watching via the webcast. I want to thank FDA for the invitation to speak and provide some remarks on what I consider to be an unprecedented two-day public meeting to discuss the practicalities and the review of these new tobacco product applications. I'd like to start my comments by mentioning I've spent the last 8 years in tobacco regulatory science. 5 years at Altria as their Chief Medical Officer, VP of Regulatory Sciences, and the last 2.5 years as an independent consultant and the U.S. agent for Philip Morris International for their MRTP and PMTA applications. However, I want to make it clear that my comments and perspectives during this meeting do not represent the opinions or perspectives of either company. Rather, my comments arise from the totality of my 2 professional careers, first as a physician, and second for over 2.5 decades working in FDA-regulated companies. I have a great interest and a great enthusiasm for this meeting. I'm happy to see it happen. It's very timely. It's very important. The fact that over 700 people share this enthusiasm who've registered for this meeting indicates how important it is and how much we have to learn. We can really focus over the next couple days on the practicalities and the challenges of these applications, learning directly from FDA staff, from industry, and from people who represent the perspectives of tobacco control and public health. Our collective interest is understandable because the regulation of tobacco products continues to evolve. Sometimes it seems like on a weekly basis, but in fact it's very dynamic. It's understandable, it's new. We're just beginning to learn how FDA applies this unique public health standard to the review of tobacco products and other applications. We've also seen that the science behind these applications is highly complex and can be complex. It is really a nexus for different disciplines such as physical sciences, biological sciences, behavioral science, law, medicine, public policy, public health, just to name a few of the disciplines that usually are involved in these kinds of conversations. And amidst all of this, we find ourselves in a world where, despite these uncertainties and evolutions, the pace of submissions of new and modified risk applications continues to accelerate. And I think over the coming months to years, you will see a continued acceleration of these applications. So given this backdrop, what can we expect from the next 2 days of conversation? And I use that word because I think that's exactly what FDA wants this to be, which is really a dialogue that's frank, it's honest, but at the same time respectful, acknowledging that there are different views, different opinions, some of which are quite strongly held. Now, this conversation should allow everyone in this room and everyone on the webcast to feel that their issues and opinions are being heard. So I encourage each of you to become an active participant in this meeting by submitting your questions. They're anonymous, so you don't have to worry about attribution, but please submit them. Please participate in the dialogue, because in this way, the FDA will get a very good sense of the broad range of opinions and issues that confront the public about these particular applications. I think this feedback will be quite welcomed. Let me offer just a couple of expectations for the meetings, and these are my expectations and may not be yours, but let me tell you what I think we should get from the meeting. First of all, it's obvious we should all walk away with a better understanding of these application pathways, how they're used or intended to be used, and more importantly, to hear the real-world experiences of FDA, industry, and other people who've been participating in these processes. The second expectation I have is to achieve some degree of what I'll refer to as process transparency. The FDA process of review can be quite active, particularly when you first submit applications. There's a lot of dialogue and engagement. But there are also times when the FDA review process can be quite silent, sometimes for weeks, and never quite sure whether that means your application has been shelved or priority or what that actually means. So I'm hoping over the next couple of days we can have the FDA roll back the curtain a little bit on the scientific review process so the public can better understand the timing and the complexity of review as the FDA reviews these applications. My final expectation for the meeting is to listen carefully to the variety of opinions. There's very diverse opinions you'll hear over the next 2 days. And I think that allows us to engage in a better dialogue and have a better perspective on the issues that can be or have been raised in the context of applications. Any company that wants to submit applications can understand that these perspectives can be very useful as they formulate a new application, as they consider issues, they design studies. I think it allows a more fulsome dialogue and a better process. Keep in mind that it's likely the FDA will receive these same comments and perspectives about your tobacco product application from the public, particularly in the context of an MRTP docket. In conclusion, let me emphasize again once more to you in the audience and you at home, on your computers, you have an important role in broadening this conversation, enhancing the learnings from the meetings. So I urge you to relax as much as that's possible in an FDA formal meeting, contribute to the conversation, and enjoy the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Michelle Johnson. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Relations in the Office of the Center Director, and I am one of your 2 moderators for today and tomorrow. My colleague Karen Rudolph, wave Karen, will be assisting me with this. And our job today is to help facilitate this very important 2-way dialogue. I'm going to give run of show for today and tomorrow. I'll be your task mistress along with Karen. First of all, for over the next 2 days, we're going to have 8 sessions. Within these sessions, we will have our FDA experts come up and present anywhere from 2 to 3 presentations. Following the presentations, we will have our panelists, and each panelist, in alphabetical order, will introduce themselves and have 5 minutes to make their comments or statements on the topic at hand or on the presentation that's being given. So we're going to have to stick to that, so don't be mad when I cut you off, because I will. We will try very hard to follow that agenda. We have a lot of information to cover in a short period of time, but we will be accepting questions, as Jeff encouraged all of us to do. There will be note cards being passed around. We will not have microphones for questions. You'll need to write your questions, hand them back, and either Karen or I will ask the questions, either the panelists or the presenters. And really, that's all that I have to do. I need to get back to my job. I want to introduce Jennifer Smith. Jennifer, you ready?
Good morning, and thank you all for coming today. My name is Jennifer Schmitz, and I am a Regulatory Health Project Manager in CTP's Office of Science. I will be speaking today about the request for exemption from substantial equivalence pathway. Please note that you will also hear the term exemption request and see the abbreviation EXREQ throughout the presentation and during today's panel discussion. These terms are used interchangeably to identify this pathway. For this presentation, I will be providing an introduction to the 3 pathways available to market a new tobacco product, information on FDA's statutory and regulatory authority for the exemption request pathway, how to determine if a tobacco product is eligible for the exemption request pathway, an overview of the processes and timelines, and finally, program updates. So let us begin with an introduction of the marketing pathways available to market a new tobacco product. There are 3 pathways available to bring a new tobacco product to market in the United States: a pre-market tobacco product application, or a PMTA, a substantial equivalence, or SE application, and a request for exemption from substantial equivalence or exemption request. This presentation will focus on exemption requests, while presentations later today will discuss PMTAs and SE applications. The exemption request process requires the completion of 2 steps in order to market a modified tobacco product. First, an exempt order is issued by FDA, and second, the applicant submits an abbreviated report. This process will be discussed in more detail later in this presentation. Next, I will discuss FDA's statutory and regulatory authority for the exemption request pathway. FDA's statutory authority for the review of exemption requests comes from Section 905J3A of the FD&C Act. FDA's regulatory authority for exemption requests comes from, first, the exemption rule under 21 CFR 1107.1b, which became effective on August 4th, 2011. Currently, the exemption pathway is the only program with specific requirements. This rule established the procedures required to request an exemption and explains how FDA reviews requests for exemptions. Second, the refuse to accept, or RTA rule, under 21 CFR 1105.10, which became effective on January 30th, 2017, applies to all tobacco product application types. This rule established when FDA would refuse to accept a tobacco product submission or application because the application has not met a minimum threshold for acceptability. So now that you have a basic understanding of the types of marketing pathways and the statutory and regulatory authorities for exemption requests, how can a manufacturer determine if their tobacco product is eligible for an exemption request? In order to obtain a finding that a tobacco product is exempt from substantial equivalence, FDA must determine the following. 1, the new tobacco product is modified by adding or deleting a tobacco additive, or increasing or decreasing the quantity of an existing tobacco additive. Second, the proposed modification is minor and is to a legally marketed tobacco product. 3, an SE report is not necessary. And 4, an exemption is otherwise appropriate. I would like to point out that for a tobacco product to be legally marketed, it should meet one of the following criteria. It is grandfathered, it has received an SE order, exempt order, or marketing order under PMTA, or it is a provisional SE tobacco product which has not received a not substantially equivalent or NSE determination. To assist manufacturers on the CTP FDA website, we have an interactive tool which will aid in determining what pre-market pathway may be appropriate to submit for a new tobacco product. So now that we have defined FDA authority and pathway eligibility, I will provide an overview of the exemption request and abbreviated report processes and review timelines. The exemption request process requires 2 review phases. First, the exemption request is reviewed, and if an exempt order is issued, the applicant submits an abbreviated report. Both of these processes are divided into 3 distinct phases: acceptance, notification, and review. I will provide detailed information on each of these steps and phases. First, I will discuss the acceptance criteria specific for an exemption request. FDA may RTA an exemption request application if the following criteria under the exemption rule are not met. So in the first column of this table, we discuss the format of the application, which should include the following. First, the application is legible. An application may not be legible if, for example, the application included scanned documents which did not transfer completely or if they have low resolution. Second, the application is provided in the English language. If any portion of the application is submitted in a foreign language, the application should also include an English translation. Third, the application is submitted in an electronic format. What constitutes an electronic format? Electronic formats include submissions through the CTP portal, the Electronic Submission Gateway, or ESG, and physical media such as CDs, DVDs, or hard drives. You may refer to the FDA website for additional information on electronic submission file formats and specifications. In a situation where a manufacturer is unable to submit electronically, they may submit a written request to CTP, which should include the following criteria: explain in detail why they cannot submit in an electronic format, request an alternative format, and include an explanation why an alternative format is necessary. This request should be granted by FDA prior to submitting the exemption request application. In the second column of this table, we will discuss what is needed regarding product information. First, the product identified in the exemption request is a regulated product under Chapter 9 of the FD&C Act, or simply, is this a tobacco product? Second, the tobacco product is legally marketed. Third, the proposed modifications are to tobacco additives. Additional information on this topic will be presented during tomorrow's presentations. Fourth, the applicant is also the manufacturer of the original tobacco product. And fifth, the full identification of the product is included in this request. This information includes the category and subcategory of the product name, package type, and quantity. In the third column of this table, we discuss what content should be included within the application. First, the manufacturer's contact information, which should include the name of the manufacturer, the primary point of contact, and the address and phone number to receive FDA correspondence. Second, rationale or an explanation is beneficial for FDA to understand the purpose of the modification to the tobacco product, why the manufacturer considers the modification to be minor, and why the manufacturer considers an SE report is not necessary for this tobacco product. Third, a certification statement is a signed statement by a responsible official of the manufacturer which provides the rationale for the determination that the modification does not increase the tobacco product's appeal to or use by minors, toxicity, addictiveness, or abuse liability. And finally, an environmental assessment, or EA, is included in the exemption request. Now that we have discussed the specific requirements under the exemption rule, let's move on to the requirements of the RTA rule. Exemption requests will also be reviewed for acceptance under the RTA rule. This rule is applicable to all tobacco product applications, PMTA, MRTPA, SE, and exemption requests. FDA may refuse to accept an application if any of the criteria listed in this table apply. I will note that numbers 1 through 5 within this table were discussed in the previous slide under the exemption rule, so I will focus this discussion on items 6 through 10, which are specific to the RTA rule. So number 6, if the submission is received from a foreign applicant, an authorized agent that resides within the U.S. must be identified within the application along with their contact information. 7, disregards a submission not containing required FDA forms. Currently, there are no required forms for exemption requests. Number 8, the type of submission should be provided by the applicant. Is the submission requesting PMTA, SE, EX, or MRTPA? This should be identified within the application. Number 9, the submission must contain the signature of a responsible official. A responsible official is a person authorized to make decisions and act on the application. Number 10, for all submission types, excluding abbreviated reports, the submission does not include a valid claim of categorical exclusion or an environmental assessment. At this time, there are no categorical exclusions in place for exemption requests, so an EA must be submitted as part of the application. So now that we have a better understanding of acceptance criteria, I would like to introduce the exemption request review process. The steps in the exemption request review process are listed here. First, an exemption request is submitted by the manufacturer and received by FDA. Second, FDA makes a determination on acceptance, which includes either A, accept the application, issue an acknowledgement letter, and continue review, or B, FDA will refuse to accept the application for review and issue a letter which will contain explanations for why the application was not accepted. Third, we have the notification phase, and fourth, review and action phase. The notification phase will not apply to all exemption request submissions. This phase is specific to exemption requests which reference the original product as a provisional SE and which FDA has not made a determination of an SE. The purpose of this phase is to remove the specified SE report from the queue for immediate FDA review. The notification phase will include the following steps. First, in requests where a manufacturer proposes to modify an original tobacco product legally marketed under a pending provisional SE, they will receive a notification letter from FDA. This letter notifies the manufacturer that FDA will first review the provisional SE report, and once a final determination of the SE report is issued, FDA will begin review of the exemption request. The letter will also provide options for review of the exemption request and a time frame for response. FDA intends to complete review of the pending provisional SE report, even if the exemption request is withdrawn after the notification period. Next, I will discuss the review and action phase of the exemption request process. During review of the exemption request, FDA may request additional information to inform their decision on the application. If this occurs, FDA will issue an advice information request, or AI letter, to request the additional information to complete scientific review of the application. If the manufacturer provides a response by the date requested in the AI letter, FDA continues review of the exemption request, and once review is complete, FDA will make a determination on the application in the action phase of the process. However, per the exemption rule, FDA considers the exemption request withdrawn if the information is not provided within the requested time frame. Once FDA has completed substantive scientific review of the exemption request, FDA will provide the applicant with written notice of the findings. FDA issues one of the following letters during the action phase: an AI letter, a cancellation or closure letter, an exempt letter, or a not exempt letter. The cancellation, closure, exempt, and not exempt letters are final decisions and will end the exemption request process. It is important to note that FDA intends to make exempt order letters, the technical project lead or TPL review, and the EA publicly available on the FDA website in accordance with current FDA redaction procedures. We will now move on to the second step in the exemption request process, the abbreviated report. There is an additional step for a manufacturer to market the modified tobacco product, the abbreviated report. If FDA issues a found exempt order letter for the new tobacco product under Section 905J1AII of the FD&C Act, it requires that 90 days prior to the introduction or delivery for introduction of the modified tobacco product, the manufacturer shall submit a report which will demonstrate the following: the product is in compliance with the Act, All modifications are covered by exemptions granted by FDA, or it has been issued a found exempt order letter. The modifications are to a product that is commercially marketed, and actions have been taken by the manufacturer to comply with the requirements under Section 907, if applicable. After FDA has received and reviewed the abbreviated report, in general, FDA will issue an acknowledgement letter to the manufacturer. This letter acknowledges receipt so that manufacturers are aware of the 90-day timeline that must elapse prior to marketing. For the review phase of the abbreviated report, FDA conducts a review to ensure that all of the required information has been provided. During this review, if FDA requires additional information, they will issue correspondence requesting the information from the manufacturer. The final phase for abbreviated reports is when the 90 days have elapsed from FDA receipt of the submission. If the manufacturer has received no additional correspondence from FDA within the 90 days, the manufacturer may market the new tobacco product within the United States. FDA has seen an increase in applications for this pathway, and in response has taken additional efforts to provide manufacturers with an efficient and consistent process. To ensure predictability, FDA has established performance measures for the exemption request pathway, and there are 2 performance measures. First, within 21 days of receipt of an exemption request, FDA will complete its acceptance determination and issue one of the following letters: an acknowledgement letter, a refuse to accept letter, or if the application is withdrawn at any time during review, a withdrawal acknowledgement letter. Second, within 60 days of receipt of an exemption request or start of a new review cycle, FDA will review and act with the issuance of one of the following letters: an AI letter, a closure letter, an exempt order letter, or a not exempt order letter. Performance measures regarding exemption requests can be found on the FDA website. FDA has exceeded the performance goal to render an acceptance decision in 21 days for this measure in the 2 years since its implementation in 2017. Through fiscal year 2022, both performance measures will be at 80%. For the same time period, the goal to review and act on an exemption request within 60 days showed marked improvement between fiscal year 2017 and fiscal year 2018. Please note that FDA intends to revise the performance measures website in early 2019 to reflect a correction to reported 2017 values, along with inclusion data for those exemption requests received within the last fiscal quarter that are pending review. Through fiscal year 2022, the performance measure will also be at 80%. FDA has gained additional experience with the submission and review of abbreviated reports. An appendix to the exempt order letter is provided with FDA's suggested format for the submission of the abbreviated report. Manufacturers may use the suggested format to certify that the tobacco product has met the requirements in sections 905J1A II and 905J1B of the FD&C Act. For exemption requests, 21 CFR 1107.1B9 states that an exemption request must contain an environmental assessment under Part 25 of this chapter prepared in accordance with the requirements of 25.40 of this chapter. FDA previously refused to accept exemption requests that did not include the basic elements required for a complete EA. FDA currently accepts exemption requests that include an EA. However, an AI letter may be issued to request additional information needed for the EA. Additional information on preparing an EA will be provided in tomorrow's FDA presentation. So this concludes the presentation on the exemption request and abbreviated report processes. I would like to thank you for your attention during this presentation, and I recognize a lot of information was discussed, so I encourage you to ask questions during the panel discussion later on today. Thank you.
morning. My name is Christy Stark, and I'm the Director for the Division of Regulatory Project Management within the Office of Science. Today, my presentation is going to focus on the Substantial Equivalence Program. Within this presentation, I plan to discuss a high-level overview for the SE program and share some more recent program updates in response to experience gained. So let's start with an overview of the SE program. Manufacturers must submit new tobacco products for FDA review. Generally, the pre-market provisions provide FDA with the authority over a tobacco product before it enters the market. A new product that does not meet the statutory pre-market requirements cannot be legally marketed. If the new tobacco product does not meet the statutory pre-market requirements and a manufacturer markets and sells their tobacco product in the United States, they will be in violation of the Act. As you heard in the last presentation, there are 3 pathways to market a new tobacco product. Here we're focused on substantial equivalence, an alternative to a pre-market application. Specifically, 905J1 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act provides that in general, at least 90 days prior to the introduction of your new tobacco product into U.S. interstate commerce, an applicant should submit an SE report. So for determination of substantial equivalence, the manufacturer must demonstrate that the new product has the same characteristics as the predicate tobacco product, or it may have different characteristics than the predicate tobacco product, but the information submitted must demonstrate that that new product does not raise different questions of public health. As this pathway is based on a comparison between a new and predicate tobacco product, this generally means that products brought to market will not present more harm to the public health than the predicate tobacco product it is found substantially equivalent to. So an eligible tobacco product is either a grandfathered tobacco product, meaning it was commercially marketed in the United States as of February 15, 2007, or a product FDA has previously found substantially equivalent. It is not a tobacco product authorized under a PMTA, exemption request, MRTPA, or a pending provisional product. Of note, there are 2 types of SE reports. They're known as regular and provisional SE reports. The scientific standard and review for both types of these reports are the same. The main difference is when the product subject of the SE report may be legally marketed within the United States. So basically, regular SE reports are applications for new tobacco products that require marketing authorization prior to being introduced into the U.S. market. This is the majority of our SE reports in-house. In contrast, a new tobacco product under a provisional SE report may be legally marketed unless an order issues finding that new tobacco product not substantially equivalent to its corresponding predicate. In order to be noted as a provisional product, the following 2 criteria must be met. First, the SE report must have been submitted by March 22nd, 2011. And second, the product, that new product that is subject of that provisional SE report, must have been delivered for introduction into interstate commerce for commercial distribution in the U.S. after February 15th, 2007, and prior to March 22nd, 2011. So in simple terms, for the SE reports FDA is currently receiving, they're coded as regular SE reports, and the new product requires marketing authorization prior to an order finding the new product. They require an order prior to legal marketing. So now let's walk through a high-level stepwise approach to the SE process. And I'm going to note this is a snapshot in time, and we expect to continue to improve our review process through feedback and in meetings such as this. So the SE process is broken into 3 phases. Phase 1 is acceptance, Phase 2 is notification, and Phase 3 encompasses the substantive scientific review. So first, let's focus on the acceptance phase. This phase includes 3 steps based on the type of substantial equivalence report under review. For all SC reports, the application is received and sent to the assigned regulatory health project manager. During this time, the RHPM will actually perform an acceptance review and determine if the product is under CTP jurisdiction and if it contains additional mandated items, either from the statute or from regulation. The findings in these reviews will determine if the application should either be acknowledged or receive a refuse to accept decision. So step 3, the public health impact review, occurred for provisional SC reports. For regular SC reports, products are reviewed using a first-in, first-reviewed approach. However, because a large number of provisional reports were received on the same date, and because these products are currently on the market, FDA determined that it was not practical nor appropriate to use a first-in, first-reviewed approach for these provisionals. Therefore, a public health impact review categorized each provisional SC report and placed them into a tier meant to capture the relative potential of raising a different question of public health. Classification of a report into one of these tiers does not mean that the new tobacco product described therein does or does not raise different questions of public health. That determination can only be made after full scientific evaluation of the provisional SC report. So once an SC report is accepted, it moves into the notification phase. During this phase, CTP will conduct a review to ensure the predicate tobacco product is eligible. Again, that predicate tobacco product may either be a grandfathered tobacco product or a product previously found SE. If the applicant stated that the predicate tobacco product was marketed in the U.S. as of February 15, 2007, a grandfathered claim, the Office of Science has sent a request to the Office of Compliance and Enforcement for a grandfather determination. So in addition, if you look at provisional SC reports, CTP will also send a notification letter to those applicants to inform them that their SC report has entered this phase of review. The purpose of this letter is threefold. First, it updates the applicant of that SC report as to the projected start date of the scientific review. Second, it allows the applicant to amend their SC report with any additional information to support an SC determination prior to the start of scientific review. This is important because FDA is not obligated to review amendments received after the start of scientific review. And third, it informs the applicant that GF review is starting and they may be contacted by a representative of the Office of Compliance and Enforcement with respect to grandfather determination, if applicable. So phase 3 is where the majority of the scientific review occurs. Generally, SC reports are assigned a chemist, toxicologist, engineer, and environmental reviewer. Depending on the contents of the report and the data submitted, we may add other disciplines as necessary. If necessary, a deficiency letter, such as an advice information request or preliminary finding letter, is also issued. Now, once the reviewers have completed their reviews, CTP will then determine if the new tobacco product is scientifically substantially equivalent or not substantially equivalent to its corresponding predicate tobacco product. When that final SC determination is made, we move into the action portion of this phase. If the determination is a scientific finding of SE, CTP will then review to see if any additional information is needed to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. If additional information is needed, in general, a letter issues to the applicant. In addition, for regular SC reports, FDA must determine that the new tobacco product is in compliance with the requirements of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Now, once these steps have been completed, an appropriate order letter issues, and the assigned RHPM will contact the applicant and offer a courtesy copy of that order letter. Additionally, for provisional NSC decisions, the RHPM will also offer a courtesy copy of an appropriately redacted technical project lead review. This is the summary basis for that decision, and the last cycle primary discipline review that serves as the basis for that NSC decision. If those documents are not ready at the time of the courtesy call, the project manager will provide a general time frame for when they will be ready and submit at that time. And finally, CTP will post the TPL review and order letter with appropriate redactions. In general, these documents are posted for all SE decisions and for provisional NSE decisions. So now that we've seen a high-level program overview, let's transition to some of the updates. For this part of the presentation, I'd like to focus on what's been occurring with both industry and FDA in the following areas: unique identification, letter language updates, focusing scientific resources, the response time to our deficiency letters, common issues in SE reports, and performance goals. These 6 items are examples of program improvements over time based on dialogue between CTP and industry. Each of these elements have enhanced the consistency, transparency, and predictability of the SE program, and they are a nice example of growth over time. So let's move to unique identification. One of the challenges we've seen with the SE program was the lack of uniquely identifying both new and predicate tobacco products. It's been an issue as CTP has been unable to determine what specific products were being requested for review and what predicate tobacco products were being used for comparison. For example, past applications for a cigarette may only contain identification of the brand name. It would lack identification of properties such as the package type, the package quantity, the length, the diameter, and the ventilation. This could mean there could be multiple products under review or being compared to, and as such, it wasn't clear what the applicant was requesting FDA to do. More recently, though, we've seen an improvement in applications as applicants have been able to better understand what properties FDA needs for identification of these tobacco products. We've found success through an open dialogue with industry. So through this process, we provided applicants with an opportunity to amend their SE reports to provide unique identification for their new and predicate products. We posted TPL reviews on our website, which provided examples of unique identification categories, subcategories, and properties, and RHPMs have been available to assist applicants with questions around unique identification. Additionally, as discussed in Ms. Schmitz's presentation, the RTA rule published, which provided further help regarding product identification. Collectively, these efforts resulted in improved identification of tobacco products under review. So in addition to improving the identification of our tobacco products, we also received feedback regarding our communications with applicants. So over the last 7 years, the correspondence for the SE program has evolved. More recently, based on stakeholder feedback, we've updated the language within our letters to improve communication and expectations between the applicant and FDA. So for example, we've stated the purpose of our correspondence in the first paragraph, used plain language where possible, clarified how to submit amendments, removed duplicative language, clearly identified response due dates where applicable, such as in a deficiency letter. I included the RHPM email address for ease of communications, and within the deficiency letters, those AI and PFINE letters for the SE program, we have visibly identified the difference between a deficiency, which is something that must be responded to for that scientific finding of SE, versus a request, which is a nice to have. So let's quickly walk through one of our updated notification letters so you can see what this looks like. I note this is not a complete sample of our notification letter. Instead, it's a snapshot of our template, and the image on the screen includes excerpts to illustrate some of the changes that I'll go through. So as you can see, the purpose is illustrated at the top of the letter within this paragraph stating, we expect to begin our scientific review of all information contained in your SE reports, including amendments received within 180 days from the date of the letter. Other examples you'll see include clear language for when the response is due here on the screen, and you see it stated as, if a review cycle ends with us issuing a deficiency letter, we expect to provide you with 180 days to respond to the letter. We've also updated the language regarding amendments. You can see the paragraph here. For clarity, we're now asking for amendments in a single submission and providing recommendations for how to organize the response. And last is one of the most important features of the letter. This is your assigned regulatory health project manager. Their information is listed at the bottom of all of your letters. This is your liaison. They can assist with any application-related questions, and we have now updated to include their email address for ease of communication. So as you can see, improvement with communication, we also looked for areas where we could focus our scientific resources towards a greater public health impact. One of the areas we examined was our review of provisional SE reports. So unlike tobacco products subject of regular SE reports, the tobacco products subject of the provisional SE reports are legally sold under the Act. CTP is not required by statute to review or act on these reports. Although there was no requirement for that, the agency initially intended to review and act on all of them. In July 2017, FDA's commissioner noted CTP would examine its existing approach to the review of the approximate 2,500 remaining provisional SE reports in an effort to focus on reviews with the greatest public health impact. With the years of experience conducting thousands of SE reviews and with greater understanding of tobacco products, FDA announced a change in its approach. The agency would continue to review the approximate 1,000 pending provisional SE reports that were determined to have the greatest potential to raise a different question of public health, and would remove from review approximately 1,500 provisional SE reports that were determined less likely to do so. So the purpose of this was twofold. First, to maximize CTP's application review capacity, and second, to focus on public health goals by investing more review capacity to those tobacco products which are more likely to raise different questions of public health. To date, through the remove from review process, FDA has removed an estimated 1,200 provisional SE reports. For those interested, the complete list is available on our website, and we'll continue to update the list as additional applicants respond with the requested information to have their product removed from review. So I note this change in review perspective is unique to provisional SE reports and does not translate to regular SE reports. Through this process, CTP is focusing its scientific review resources and is prepared to receive and review the upcoming applications for deemed tobacco products. So under the remove from review process, eligible applicants have received correspondence from CTP. This means if your product met the criteria for RFR, you would have received a letter from FDA noting if your product was removed from review, or if additional information was requested in order to remove the product from review. So for example, if you were missing the date your new tobacco product was first introduced or delivered for introduction into interstate commerce for commercial distribution in the U.S., that would be requested prior to any decision to remove from review. If you've not received a letter regarding information around removing a provisional product from review, this means that FDA intends to review your provisional SE report in the order as determined by the PHI tier. As such, you would receive a notification letter consistent with the SE process. Now, even if a provisional product was removed from review, it can be brought back into the review queue if any of the following occurs. First, that product that was removed from review could have another pending application submitted by the same manufacturer, such as an MRTPA. Second, FDA could receive new information, such as from inspectional findings, suggesting that that new tobacco product is more likely to have the potential to raise different questions of public health. And third, FDA has reason to believe that that new tobacco product was not introduced or delivered for introduction into interstate commerce for commercial distribution in the U.S. after February 15, 2007 and prior to March 22, 2011. I do note applicants that are placed back into the review queue will receive a notification letter consistent with our process. So as part of the RFR process, CTP has focused its resources on certain SE reports. To give you a sense of the criteria that was considered for that product to remain in the review queue, this slide lists some examples for provisional products that continue to be reviewed. So a non-conventional tobacco product, an example could include a product that had novel features, such as a crushable bead within a cigarette. With respect to inadequate characterization between the new and predicate tobacco products, it could be a product listed that's not uniquely identified, such as only identifying a brand and category, not listing your subcategories or properties within the product. For differences in categories, it could be something like a cigarette compared to a smokeless tobacco product. With respect to design changes that may increase harmful and potentially harmful constituents, this could be products compared that have major changes in filter design, or even comparing a filtered cigarette to a cigarette that does not contain a filter. Additionally, we've seen some comparisons with large changes to tobacco blends, which could increase nitrosamines or PAHs, and those would also remain within the review queue. So in addition to focusing our scientific resources, CTP then started to begin to examine if the response times within our deficiency letters were appropriate. And as I noted earlier, over the last 7 years, the correspondence for the SC program has evolved. More recently, based on stakeholder feedback, we understand that applicants have received advice information request letters or preliminary finding letters, what we term deficiency letters, with response times of 60 days or 30 days respectively. Many applicants have noted that to fully respond, additional time has been needed, and to that point, FDA has received multiple requests for extensions of time. So in examining the types of information listed in these deficiency letters and the time needed to respond, for example, to perform necessary tests responsive to the deficiency, the time frame within the deficiency letters has been extended. All deficiency letters issued post-October 1st, 2018 now provides for 180 days for applicants to prepare information and respond. We believe that by extending the response time to 180 days, applicants now have sufficient time to respond to all deficiencies within their letters. Therefore, with the additional extension of time to 180 days, FDA does not intend to grant additional extensions of time to respond to deficiency letters. And additionally, when examining the amount of time to provide responsive information, the notification letter, which issues to signal the start of the scientific review for provisionals, has also been extended to 180 days. These changes in timelines were in response to industry feedback. By extending this time frame and removing the extensions of times to respond to letters, the SC process is more predictable and allows for adequate time to respond to deficiencies without significant delay to the review process. So now let's look at how this translates to the review process if a response to a deficiency letter is submitted early or late. So if the applicant amends early, before the 180 days has elapsed, the assigned RHPM will process the amendment and verify if the applicant has responded to all deficiencies. So, for example, if there's 10 deficiencies listed within the letter and the applicant responds to all 10, the scientific review will commence as of the receipt date of that amendment. However, if it's an incomplete response, so for example, out of the 10 deficiencies, the applicant only responded to 5, CTP will wait until either the applicant responds to the remaining deficiencies or the 180 days elapses, whichever is sooner. So that means if the applicant does not respond to those remaining deficiencies, CTP will initiate scientific review on day 181. This is the next day after the response date. In the event that amendments are received after the 180-day response date, CTP does not intend to review those amendments. However, if there is another review cycle, information may be incorporated into that cycle. So now we've touched on increased communication to better identify products, clarifying our letter language, focusing scientific resources through the RFR process, and increasing the amount of time to respond to deficiency letters. One other area that we identified for improvement with industry's help was around communicating common issues seen within SC reports. So many of these common issues have previously been provided in webinars, posted TPL reviews, and through meetings, but it may be difficult for applicants to find one location identifying all common issues. So to ensure applicants have the information in one location for their products, starting October 1st, 2018, FDA has revised both the acknowledgement and notification letters to include appendices with common issues identified in previous SE reports for specific tobacco product category and subcategories. So for example, if an applicant submits a new SE report for a cigarette, they'll receive an appendix with information to consider for cigarettes. Some examples of information included within the appendix may have, but is not limited to, evidence needed for an eligible tobacco product predicate, addressing toxicity caused by ingredient changes, use of a model, and so on. It's important to note that these appendices reflect deficiencies frequently seen in previous SE reports for that category. The information may not be applicable to the current products within the report. If a difference exists between the new and predicate tobacco products, it is the applicant's responsibility to provide a rationale for each difference with scientific evidence and a discussion for why that difference does not cause the new product to raise different questions of public health. To the extent that it's applicable, the information provided within the appendix can be used by applicants to determine whether their SE report should be amended or withdrawn prior to FDA's review of the SE report. So here's a sample section of the appendix for information to consider for cigarettes. Here you'll see again the language noted at the top that it reflects deficiencies frequently seen in previous SE reports for cigarettes. Again, this is a sample that only shows the top portion, and we begin with unique identification. Here you're going to see continued language around tobacco product identification and the properties that should be provided for the different subcategories. And another section of the letter is the start of information around the use of a predicate tobacco product that you no longer manufacture. You'll see the appendix lists out potential options for providing data on that predicate tobacco product. Again, the addition of these appendices were in response to industry feedback. The goal was to collate information already available from the TPLs posted on our website. Tomorrow you'll hear from Drs. Rogers and Cecil on the approach to CTP scientific review for the SE program, and they'll discuss many of these topics in more detail. So last but not least, I'd like to focus on the predictability of FDA review and action. In April 2014, FDA announced the development of a set of performance measures that would help improve timeliness and predictability for the review of certain applications, including SE reports. In April this past year, FDA extended these performance measures for regular SE reports to fiscal year 2022, and as part of the re-examination of the review queue for provisional SE reports, FDA announced new performance measures for them. The performance measures for provisionals are similar to those for regulars, but they're tailored for the unique circumstances. So the goals are as follows. For regular SE reports, within 21 days, FDA intends to issue an acknowledgement, refuse to accept, or withdrawal acknowledgement letter. Within 90 days, to issue a deficiency letter, a closure type letter, or an order letter. For provisional SE reports, within 21 days, FDA intends to issue withdrawal acknowledgement letters. There are no refuse to accept or acknowledgement letters for these because the reports were submitted in 2011, so it's moot. And then within 120 days, FDA intends to issue a deficiency letter, a closure type letter, or an order, and it's 120 days of commencing scientific review. So let's take a quick peek at the performance goals for the 21 days for regular SE reports. You're going to see that it was 70% for the goal to be met in FY17 and 80% in FY18 through FY22. And FDA has been taking some great strides to meet them and has been successful. I will note that there is still some open cohort data for FY18. It will close shortly, and the data will be available in early 2019. Looking at the 90-day goals for regular SE reports, you'll see again in FY17 we had a goal of 70%, and FY18 is 80% through FY22. Again, you'll see for both FY17 and FY18, FDA has met these goals. And again, for FY18, we have an open cohort that will close by the end of the year, and data will be available in early 2019 with the final numbers. And looking at provisional SE reports, you'll see that the goal is 50% starting in this fiscal year 19 and increases by 10% to max out at 80% in FY22. So to close, I want to remind you of the importance of your assigned regulatory health project manager. They're your main point of contact for your SE application and can assist with general inquiries about your pre-market pathways, application submission and review process, help with useful resources on the web, clarify some of what's in our letters, provide reference, and also aid you through the formal meeting process, which you'll hear about later today. And just in case you've read all the SE guidances, viewed the webinars, and wanted additional information, the slide provides some links to some of the resources that are out there to give a little bit more information on what I spoke about today, and a few other helpful things as you're navigating through. If you still have questions and you aren't sure where to go, please use our general inquiries email at AskCTP. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer and Christy. If I could have the panelists come up front here, we're going to hear from them. Again, each speaker has 5 minutes to introduce themselves and make comments or statements about the presentations we just heard. Don't forget alpha order. This work? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So now that I know the difference between number 1 and number 2 panel, but not how to use a microphone, we will start, as I said, in alpha order with Roseanne Beltry and with introductions. And I just want to remind people, for folks that are still filtering in, that we do have some assigned seating for our panelists. And again, we will be using these cards for you to put your questions on. Raise your hand if you need a card, and someone will walk by and hand you one so that we can use them for the question and answer session of the panel. Roseanne?
Good morning. My name is Rosanna Beltry, and I am the Deputy Director of the Division of Regulatory Project Management.
Hi, I'm Brittany Cushman, Senior Vice President of External Affairs for Turning Point Brands. All right, well, I will start then. So my name is Brittany Cushman. As I said, I have had the experience of working on the initial round of provisional applications that were filed back in 2011. And I was certainly one of those people who was working on them all night long to get them out the door, because one of the issues that we've had in this process that I think both the agency and companies have been dealing with is kind of learning as we go and working on these applications as we go. So we were getting new information right up until pretty close to the filing deadlines and trying to supplement as best we could. And with their provisionals, the experience was that it was a lot of silence for a long time, which one of the speakers mentioned earlier that there would be this event of silence, and then all of a sudden in the mail you would get this rubber banded stack of letters. And while 30 days might be okay to respond to one or two of those letters, when you get the stack, it's a little overwhelming, especially for some of the small companies where one person might be doing 20 different jobs and then all of a sudden have 60 letters to respond to. So I speak from that experience firsthand, but also from the experience of working with CIPMO, which is the Council of Independent Tobacco Manufacturers. And that's a group of small tobacco product manufacturers under the Act who have dealt with these issues. So we've gotten some feedback from all of their experiences and kind of collectively put together some thoughts. And a lot of that has centered around what I think the agency has rightfully recognized is the issues of transparency and consistency. And a lot of the comments today, I think, really touched on that and were some really good solutions. One thing that stuck out to me was in talking about the response letters that have these appendices that have additional information for various product categories. That to me is a great idea. You know, been a long time coming, but I'm really happy it's coming into place. What I would recommend there is that should be made public, not be something that is received in a deficiency letter where the company says, oh, well, now I have the map to comply, so now I can finally do these things, but I only have 180 days. Another comment I would make on what Christy had mentioned was this idea of getting rid of extensions across all applications. And I understand the thinking that went into that decision. I appreciate that there's an examination of deficiencies and why extensions were needed, what timelines were needed. But I think what that perhaps doesn't take into account is we're about to move into a period of time where a number of products, and when I say a number, I mean thousands of products, are going to be going to labs and needing testing done. So when you're talking about 180 days in today's environment, I think that looks very different when you're moving into a situation of labs already being behind. And I'm sure many of us on the panel have been in touch with labs on HPHC testing and other PMTA-related testing coming up, and they're already expressing major concerns about capacity. So that, I think, needs to be taken into account in this idea of getting rid of extensions. With that, I'll pass along. So I want to make sure we leave a lot of time for Q&A because I think that'll be really useful to this discussion.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Lindegaard. I am from Scandinavian Tobacco Group, a company focused on cigars and traditional pipe tobacco. I am the Senior Vice President responsible for scientific and regulatory affairs. First of all, thank you to FDA for hosting this important event. I think it's critical that we stay in close dialogue in order to get good and effective regulation in place. I have a few comments as well about my background. Here I have 25 years of experience within the industry, working primarily in scientific and regulatory affairs as well as product development. I have been deeply involved in the SE applications that have been submitted by our company as the sort of scientific anchorman responding to many of the questions from FDA. While I know that the discussion here today will be dictated by questions from the audience, I would also like to raise a few points to inspire the questions or the dialogue. The first point is really about, I hope we can move forward on making the SE process even more efficient. One of the examples in this context that we have experienced is that we have been unable, in most cases, to transfer learnings from one SE to a next SE. That means we have produced data on a specific additive or product feature, but when we get to the next SE, we have to repeat it all over because there are possibly minor changes to the blend or other things, which produces an enormous amount of work for each SE, which probably is not needed. The second point I have is, in my view, some of the inconsistencies that are created by the SE system, in the sense that, an example, we might want to increase, as a part of several modifications, the level of an additive from 1% to 1.1, and have to demonstrate that there are no new questions of public health associated with that. While in many other products we have, which are predicates or grandfathered, this particular additive might be used in 3% or 5%, perfectly okay, because we're not changing it. That doesn't make much sense to me. Also, I see that the way that the reductions or increase of an additive is treated in the exemption process seems to be quite different from the way it is being assessed in the SE process, which is also strange to me. So those are points I hope we can get questions on and discuss. I also had a point about the timelines for deficiency letters, but that is somewhat covered. But I do share some of the same concerns, seeing that we have just our company, thousands of products coming in to this process. So there are still some concerns there. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Murphy. I'm a Senior Director within the Submissions and Engagement Group, Scientific and Regulatory Affairs of RAI Services Company. RAI Services Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of Reynolds American Inc. that bears primary responsibility for regulatory compliance for RAI's operating companies, including R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, American Snuff Company, Santa Fe Natural Tobacco Company, and R.J. Reynolds Vapor Company. I thought I'd begin by providing just a brief description of my background at Reynolds that informs my perspective. Since late 2009, I have been heavily involved in effectively operationalizing and refining both the substantial equivalence and exemption from SE programs for Reynolds, Santa Fe, and American Snuff Company. Over that time, I've also been involved in or have led work streams with other submissions, including PMTAs, regular and provisional SEs, exemptions, the now defunct same characteristic SE submissions, and MRTPAs. I currently lead a multidisciplinary team whose primary responsibility is managing all provisional SE reports on behalf of Reynolds and Santa Fe for traditional combustible cigarettes, non-combusted cigarettes, and roll-your-own tobacco. So to provide you a little bit of a high-level overview of a Reynolds experience with the SE and exemption request programs, I'll note that we submitted our first SE report in June of 2010. That was 9 months before the provisional window closed, and that particular application was assigned STN 0000001. Since that summer, we have experienced the highs and the lows of the SE and exemption request programs. Solely based on the information that's publicly available, this includes clearance orders for both provisional and regulars, some level of success with our approach to exemption requests, and as most are aware, 4 NSE orders. Which leads me to make a couple of observations, some general, some more specific about areas where I think things are going well, and lastly, some things where I think there are some room for improvement. So in general, as could be expected, as both the agency and applicants stood up their respective programs, things could be perceived as fairly chaotic. I had the distinct impression that in many instances, we were talking past each other through regulatory correspondence. One of the things we learned fairly quickly that is very critical in terms of communicating with FDA and CTP specifically is nomenclature and terminology. We at Reynolds have a very specific way about how we describe our products, our specifications, our manufacturing processes. If terminology is unaligned, we must at a minimum have a common understanding of certain terms and their respective use. I recognize that in many ways, both the agency and applicants have significantly evolved since 2009. Two good examples of this evolution from a Reynolds perspective. One, our internal vocabulary, at least in the submissions group, is markedly different than it was pre-2009. Two, I know that Reynolds, we consistently focus on evolving the form, format, and content of our applications in order to more clearly communicate disparate types of product data and articulate lines of argument, improve the quality of our submissions, and facilitate FDA review. So I'll now note three things that, from our perspective, things are going well. I've seen increased engagement through the use of quote-unquote informal meetings. These are usually brief teleconferences or email traffic. We're pleased with the timeliness and the responsiveness of our assigned regulatory health project managers. And I'm not just saying that because Jennifer's sitting here in the room. Second, based on our experience and CTP's stated priorities, review timeframes for regular SEs and exemptions are accelerating and demonstrate the viability of those particular pathways. Lastly, some exceptions notwithstanding, consistency among various FDA reviews and I didn't either. Where was it? Consistency among various FDA reviews and individual reviewers is improving. This helps set expectations, which ultimately is what a regulatory industry wants, consistency and predictability. So lastly, I'll focus on a couple of things that could be improved upon. Given the DC District Court's ruling in Philip Morris USA et al. Versus FDA, applicants have little regulatory clarity on the same characteristics prong of the SE pathway. Second, to date, guidance documents and webinars have lacked actionable information. And lastly, in the majority of cases, written regulatory correspondence is the only form of substantive communication with the agency in regards to provisional SE applications currently under review. Thank you.
Short and sweet. I'm Christy Stark again, the Director for the Division of Regulatory Project Management.
Just so we don't have any more feedback issues, I'm just going to stand up here. So we have a couple of questions. Again, if anyone has any questions in the audience, raise your hand and you'll be given a card and it'll be brought up here to be presented to the panel. The first question we got is, in prioritizing the review of provisional SE applications, what are the classification criteria used?
I'm assuming this is to the RFR classification that we placed out. Is that in the question?
I read it as
The
is, but
PHI.
we're going to.
Okay, so I'll start, and Rosa, you can jump in if you'd like. So for our tiers that are out there, we actually, in a past webinar, discussed what the top tier was, PHI Tier 1, where they remain in review. And the main ones that I actually had bullets up on the slide were non-conventional products, so something that was novel that wasn't out there more recently, for a long time, so it was more recent. We looked at products that weren't fully identified, so you may come in with a tobacco product just with the brand name and it's 2 pages rather than listing your full ingredients and all of your product design features, other items, and then comparing across categories. When we went into the next tier, some of those elements were also listed on the slide where we talked about major blend changes. We talked about large increases significant with HPHCs. We had some changes with some of our acids and bases. When we get down to some of the lower level ones that we looked at for the remove from review queue, we were looking at some smaller things such as we had some changes to papers where there was no filler in there. They were very small. We had a few others where we looked at certain types of changes to packaging that didn't necessarily translate into the product itself. Rosa, do you have anything to add?
Okay. Christy, you have a couple of questions directed to you. It asks, can you speak to how deemed products will be handled within the regular SE process? It says, as SEs for deemed products are currently not due until October 2020, will they be treated as provisional SEs and be permitted to remain on the market until SE or NSE final determination? What will be the performance standards?
So to hit the provisional SE, to be a provisional product is a very specific definition by statute. So the report had to be submitted by March 21st, 2011, and that new product had to be introduced after February 15, 2007, up to and through March 21st, 2011. So these will not be considered provisional products. With respect to the review process, we are prepared to receive and review them. We're prepared to look at them first in, first reviewed. I cannot speak to any types of potential compliance policies or anything else that may arise or anything that the commissioner may state. As Director Zeller stated this morning, there's not much else we can give. However, we will try to be proactive and engaged with industry as we move through that.
Next question for you. Did you have something else, Roseanne, to say?
I think that as Christy's presentation alluded to, we are sort of going through the program and evaluating our processes and making sure that we are ready for, unlike in 2011 where we were just sort of assembling the center, I think we're in a much better place now in terms of the maturity of the programs and finding ways for us to be more transparent and expedient with our process as best we can.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. This question also for you. It says, in an effort towards transparency, will CTP provide details on the public health tiering, like how this tiering was undertaken and what the outcome is? And also, what is the basis for the SE acceptance criteria? You mentioned that this is being determined by CTP. Can it be shared with industry?
Sure. So for the tiering itself, we had quite a bit for the Tier 1 in our webinar that was out there when we went through all of those elements. My slide talked about a few others. I want to note that that PHI tiering was based off of that report at that point in time. We looked at that new product as compared to the predicate, and we looked to see what the differences were. Applicants in general should have received notification if they're in the tiers where they're less likely to raise a different question of public health. If there are questions, they still can reach out to their assigned RHPM. With respect to the acceptance criteria for the SE program, there are two areas that we look at for acceptance. We look at what is needed from the statute. So we're going to look at the basis for SE. We're going to look at, is there a health information summary or statement present? And we're going to be looking at regulatory items such as the RTA rule as well. So as you heard in Jennifer Schmitz's presentation, we're looking at, is an EA present? Are you going to be identifying your product? Do we have a U.S. agent present if this is a foreign applicant? So items such as that. For any additional required items for acceptance, that would have to be through rulemaking, so stay tuned.
I think that industry has matured and so has the program, and we've seen a marked increase in products that are accepted. It's actually, I would say, almost relatively rare to receive a refuse to accept through the SE program, through the webinars and through venues such as these. I think applicants have definitely learned what are the sort of the criteria, the regulatory statutory criteria necessary for the program. So there's definitely been an increase in terms of industry and submitting stronger applications that would make it through that acceptance threshold.
To give you a sense of the most repeat offender for an RTA decision now, it's really around environmental considerations. And you're going to hear a presentation on that later on in the program. I know people have had experience. Please make sure for any application that comes in, you have that EA submitted with your application.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is it a safe assumption that this was a one-and-done process, meaning the tiering by PHI for each particular application and how that fed into the potential RFRs?
It is a snapshot in time, and it was a high-level review conducted with the information that we had at the time. I know that we've been maybe recently with the RFR efforts sort of talked about it a little bit more, but that should not be interpreted as we are either re-reviewing these applications or evaluating recent information. It was conducted, I think, in spring of 2013. I'm looking for confirmation just about with the information that we had at that point in time.
So what I'm hearing is that you are not reviewing that, but you're not discounting the fact that that could happen at some point in the future.
PHI has been completed with the information we had in 2013 at that time.
Okay. Is that good? Okay. Next question. Can you speak to how to provide comments to the proposed SE rule, which I understand is currently under OMB review?
Sure. As soon as the comment period opens up, we are soliciting all comments. It would be helpful when providing them that you provide rationale for your position so that we can take that under advisement and respond appropriately. There should be Federal Register notice out there. Docket should be open when it's available for comment.
All right. For provisional SC reports, can CTP confirm that going forward, the Office of Science review cycle is 120 days as opposed to the previous 90-day timeline for review? Also, can you please go over the review timelines for regular SC reports?
So as you saw in today's slide with the performance measures that we placed out, the review timeframe for provisional SC report cycles is 120 calendar days. I contrast that with regular SC reports, which is 90 calendar days. I think that gets to the whole question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
This sounds excellent. Our experience so far, and we might be in the percentages that have not hit the target, but still the SEs we have in place have, and partly on our own fault, I'm sure, but have been in process for more than 6 years and are still not clarified. So I think with the experience we had that it would be worthwhile discussing if there were steps to take to really make the assessment of these products dramatically more efficient. For example, by doing like most other countries around the world, saying we look at the additives, which additives are accepted to be used in cigarettes, at what level, rather than having to assess each additive for each cigarette every time there is a new application. That would really dramatically increase the transparency for the industry and ease the work for the agency. Have you discussed such an approach?
So I heard two different points. One is a fair point with many provisional applications that were received in 2010 and 2011. They've been sitting. I want to note for these performance goals for 120 days, we were kicking them off starting this fiscal year, October 1st, 2018. So any applicant that receives a notification letter, you're on the 120-day cycle. Any applicant that starts to receive a deficiency letter starting October 1st, 2018 or after, you're on the 120-day cycle. For those, such as some of the STNs within your company that are beforehand, we are actively trying to move through that queue and get you an appropriate letter within a reasonable amount of time. And We are trying to look at those that have been languishing the longest to get those out first, to be completely fair. With respect to some of the standard that you're looking at for the SE program, where you contrasted it with the exemption request, SE is a little bit different. You are taking a new product and you're comparing it to a predicate. So it really is that one-to-one comparison where we're looking for differences between that product that is already out there and the new one. I'm going to contrast that where you look at an exemption request, or you could look at a pre-market tobacco application where you don't have that necessary comparator and you are starting to look at that appropriate for the protection of public health standard. You're also looking at, are there certain additive percentage changes or other items that may be applicable? That may also get into some of the categories that you're looking at for potential areas for exemption, which would require some thought and rulemaking to go into it. We're open to feedback that you may have with that. If you guys have ideas, this is part of the meeting today. And I know that there's going to be quite a bit more discussion on that scientific standard in tomorrow's presentation by Dr. Walters, Rogers, and Cecil. Does that get to some of your questions?
Yes and no, but we will obviously pick up on some of these points on tomorrow's panel number 6, where they might fit more appropriately. But it would just be sort of a type of step that would really speed up the process, I'm sure.
Sorry. I said, I guess I would add, I think that we throw around words like there are a couple of tiers, but just to clarify, within each tier there are hundreds of reports, hundreds. So, when we receive these reports, we receive over 3,000 of them, just so that everyone is here on the same page. And even though we say 2 or 3 tiers, we're talking about a substantive amount of applications. And within sort of those applications, there's randomization, computer-based randomization to sort of put them in order so that we can organize the application in a way that they can enter scientific review. So that's one clarifying point. And 2, in terms of, Christy alluded to, making sure that you do a side-by-side comparison. So I think organization of the report, and tomorrow you hear a little bit more about that, and explanation on why you provided the information that you provided and in the form that you provided, it will go a long way, instead of the agency trying to guess why the information was provided.
And I just had a follow-up on some of the stats that in the program updates. Of those that have closed out in the projected period of time, how many of those were withdrawals, or do you have that figure, versus those that actually went to either completion or NSE or an SE?
So I don't have the numbers on me right now. I didn't pull them in. We can update our website with aggregate numbers. I can tell you that there are a much larger number of orders issuing now than in the past. So although our withdrawals have been high, we are now starting to really increase the number of SE and NSE determinations to hit those stats. So withdrawals have been decreasing as people understand what goes in to what's needed for an SE report.
And when the cohort closes online, it will be broken down by withdrawals and actions and letter types, so you'll be able to have that information.
And just as a clarifying question on something in your presentation earlier, you mentioned that when someone doesn't respond to a deficiency letter, it sounded as though from the presentation that automatically is deemed a withdrawal. Is that correct?
No.
So there is a difference between the exemption request program and the SE application program. For an SE, what we're looking at is if they do not respond, let's say they received a deficiency letter, they may go into another cycle and there may be review, or it may potentially be enough for that NSE decision. With the exemption request program, by regulation, we actually state if you fail to respond to that AI letter, the application is considered withdrawn. So that's in regulation.
I'm going to take the prerogative as the office director to ask a question of the 3 industry panelists. So Christy presented a number of improvements. You guys all sort of touched on them in your opening remarks, but I'm wondering if you could just sort of elaborate on the change in policy, on the response times, and what that means or doesn't mean. She also highlighted some of the changes that we're trying to make to the communications. I heard that some of the communication has not been all that helpful. If you could respond to maybe some of the examples she shared of how we're trying to clarify things in the letters, and are there other specific areas that you guys have in mind where maybe we are communicating, but the communication isn't as clear as it needs to be?
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and I appreciate the question, and Dr. Holman, you've been great about soliciting feedback in this area. The idea of responding with this additional information in a letter versus having it up front, I guess for me, I'm not sure why there's a disconnect between not having it at the front end where companies can submit a more fully defined SE application at the outset. I know in preparing the provisionals, obviously that wasn't available at the time, which I completely understand given the time in which the agency had been in place. But at this point, I think that within the agency, there's enough information, whether it be through reviewer guides, whether it be through these appendices that were mentioned, that should just be made public. There should be examples of notification letters, even if they're redacted, that outline some of the deficiencies you're seeing in great detail rather than just bullet points, examples of each of these items. I think as much information as possible makes the review more efficient for you all, and certainly makes it much easier for us to prepare the applications.
So Brittany, one of your opening statements was to make public some of these appendices for information to consider. We did not do that prior to the public meeting today. That is on our list to do shortly thereafter. So the appendices that individuals will be receiving, you do not need to submit an application to see what's in these appendices. We will make them publicly available, and as they're updated, we'll be updating what is on the website at that point in time, so people do have access to it. The second item that I actually have from your opening remarks was regarding extensions, lab capacity, and everything else. I know that we have now made recent changes to extend the time for deficiency letters. Can I hear a little bit more on your perspective for what denial of an extension for time to the 180 days would do to you, and what you guys are concerned with?
I think right now it's probably a bit hypothetical, but I know many of us in the room in industry have been, as I mentioned, talking to labs, and labs just on the newly deemed product side are already expressing concern that there isn't, and I will quote one without attributing it, but there isn't enough lab capacity in the world for what we're about to see in the deemed product world. So if you have applications that are still sitting there in the regular SE bin and you receive a deficiency letter that demonstrates you need some additional testing, for example, you may go to a lab and find that they're backlogged 2 years. So I think that's the concern I have in a blanket no extension policy. I just think the idea doesn't make sense considering the amount of lab work that's going to be needed upcoming, and that often deficiencies do require some lab work to be done. So I would just say revisit the policy of no extensions period and have it go back to a case-by-case basis.
So let me throw something out for discussion from the three of you to see where we're at. In general, in the past, many applicants have received an advice information request letter. They've gotten that, they've responded, they've received a preliminary finding letter. Both of these are now going to have 180-day timeframes. If you guys are starting to see, in the absence even of a pre-submission meeting, which is open to everyone, what is needed, and you can plan for your testing. So before you submit in, let's just state that you need to do stability testing on something, and that may take you a year before you get it in. How do you feel about starting the testing when you first submit the application, waiting for that first deficiency letter potentially if it's not there, and then responding to that when you have the testing information? This way you know up front, and you can plan to test accordingly at the start rather than in response to that deficiency letter.
Well, that would make a lot of sense seen from our perspective if it is clear to us what we would be expected to test. That has not always been very clear to us, and I also think it has been the result of a growing skill set within FDA in the Office of Science that we can see from the responses that we have received that they have become a lot smarter. They know a lot more detail about the products, And by knowing a lot more details, they also know a lot more questions to ask. So we got in the air, we all of a sudden got very specific questions that we were not prepared for, and we could not have, I think, anticipated earlier in the process, or we got them at the preliminary finding. So yes, we try to look forward and do the testing we think is needed, but we can't always predict exactly what type of questions are going to show up. That has been our experience anyway. So we have been struggling with some of the 30 and 60 days desperately. I mean, I've lost sleep over some of these, waiting for extension, but the 180 days is going to resolve a lot of things in the current situation, but I also agree with the potentially thousands of products that need to be tested going forward just from our company. I don't know how the timeline looks.
Yeah, so we're talking specifically about applications within the regular space, about these pre-submission meetings and setting expectations. I think we've gathered enough learning over the years